In the spring of 1979, 30 children from a rural orphanage vanished during a routine field trip. None were ever seen again. 28 years later, a road crew drills into an old highway and uncovers a buried school bus, every seat still occupied. But as investigators dig beneath the wreck, they discover a hidden chamber and a truth more engineered than anyone imagined. Year 1979. 30 children from North Lake Orphanage vanished during a supervised field trip. The day had started like any other in early spring. The sun warm, the sky soft with promise. At precisely 7:14 a.m., a yellow blue-bird school bus pulled out from the orphanage gates, its destination a state park 40 miles north. It never arrived. 28 years later, near Old Hollow Road, a county road crew in Franklin County was carving a new off-ramp for an upcoming interstate expansion. They were behind schedule, the asphalt steaming under a gray October sky. At 2:47 p.m., drill operator Benny Cray hit resistance. He assumed it was another slab of rebarred concrete, a relic from a decommissioned maintenance road. Then he felt the hollow thud, like biting into steel wrapped in air. When the cutting blade fractured, revealing a crimped seam of rusted yellow metal, the crew called it in. By 4:15 p.m., the scene was cordoned off, and a team of structural engineers arrived with jackhammers and thermal scopes. What they exposed chilled them. A fully intact school bus, buried 4 feet beneath the roadbed. The windows had been painted black from the inside. The license plate, while corroded, was traceable. Bus 6, North Lake Orphanage. The county sheriff's team arrived before sunset. What they found inside would paralyze even veteran homicide detectives. 30 seats, 30 skeletons, all belted in, small frames, children, no signs of panic, no scattered items. Just bone, still seated in eerie compliance. "It's like they never moved," said one deputy. "Or weren't able to," another replied. The driver's compartment told a different story. The steering column was warped, the door welded shut. No sign of the driver's remains. As floodlights cast their blue-white sheen over the scene, the state forensics team began mapping every inch. Bone fragments were cataloged, seat numbers cross-referenced. A distinct creak echoed as the rear emergency door, too rusted to open by hand, was finally pried free. Nothing but molded rubber matting and the odorless dust of time. At 6:03 p.m., Sergeant Irene Wells noticed something strange just beside the undercarriage, a set of faint parallel grooves cut into the hardened clay. Tire grooves, deep, deliberate, and overlapping with the footprint of the buried vehicle. They led off toward a tree line, then vanished where the soil turned rocky. She called for a cast. Plaster molds confirmed it. The pattern matched an older model county maintenance truck, a style no longer in use but archived in state fleet logs. The following morning, Wells met with records staff at the county vehicle archive. The truck in question, a 1978 Ridgecraft Model 500, had been registered to Harold C. Dalton, a road foreman for the county at the time. Dalton's name stirred memory, not from transport, but from testimony. In May of '79, Dalton had filed a whistleblower complaint against North Lake's financial officer. The orphanage, he claimed, was embezzling federal funds, falsifying headcounts, double billing the state for child support services. Weeks after his statement, Dalton vanished. Official records cite family emergency and list him as relocated out of state. No forwarding address was ever confirmed. By now, the scene near Old Hollow buzzed with controlled chaos. Drone footage circulated through the Bureau. Satellite overlays were requested. Reporters hovered, but no one was allowed within 300 yards. The mood wasn't hysteria. It was disbelief. "Nobody heard anything?" a junior agent asked. Back then, 30 orphans disappearing. They said the bus rolled over a ravine. Search turned up nothing. A weather event was blamed. Case was boxed in '83, labeled accidental loss, closed due to insufficient terrain access. But no ravine existed near the park route. The satellite images were clear. There never had been. Just after noon, a maintenance records clerk pulled a microfilm log dated April 4th, 1979, the day before the bus departed. Dalton had signed out his truck for a personal afternoon shift at Sector B14. The coordinates were exact, present-day Old Hollow Road. At 3:43 p.m., back on site, another crew member, Miguel Hartley, crawled under the bus's front axle for structural checks. He called out, "There's something stuck by the stabilizer bracket." It was a badge, County Maintenance Division. bent, half-fused to oxidized steel. The name barely visible. Dalton. Sergeant Wells held it in her gloved hand. The surface was split with heat cracks, as if burned before burial. "So Dalton was here," she murmured. "And the kids?" someone asked. "Already loaded," she said, "and he made sure they stayed that way." The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long, accusing shadows across the cracked road. Above the wreck, traffic continued along the new lanes, drivers oblivious to what lay just feet below. But the bus was awake now, and it was time for answers. What kind of man welds shut a school bus with 30 children inside? What did Dalton know? And who wanted it buried? The spring morning of April 5, 1979 had smelled of wet pine and diesel. At 7:02 a.m., a staffer at North Lake Orphanage unlocked the steel gate and waved through Bus 6. Its driver, Orville Lester, had worked for the county transport program 3 years without incident. He was punctual, quiet, middle-aged, never photographed, rarely spoken to beyond shift logs. On that day, he said 2 words to the matron signing him out. "Head count?" 30, she said, not looking up. The children boarded quietly. Some carried brown paper lunch sacks. Others clutched laminated nature guides printed by the State Parks Department. A few yawned into their sleeves. None protested. By 7:14 a.m., the bus pulled away and turned east down Hollow Bend Road. That was the last confirmed sighting, until now. At 9:05 a.m. the next day in 2007, forensic anthropologist Dr. Selma Royce crouched inside the unearthed bus, clipboard in hand. Her assistant counted aloud. 1, 2, 29, 30. Each skeleton was seatbelted. Every buckle clicked shut. No bodies on the floor, no signs of struggle or scatter. The metal floor beneath their feet was intact. No impact scrapes, no burn marks. They had not died from a crash. They had not moved. "They never had a chance to," Royce said. In seat 3A, a child's clavicle still wore the remains of a nylon backpack strap. Royce reached in with a soft brush and uncovered a corroded name tag, Maria, age 9. In seat 9C, the skull had shifted slightly against the side panel, pressed into a slant, as if it had rested that way for decades. In seat 14B, a tiny hand still clutched a cracked plastic toy whistle. All bones were juvenile, all sets consistent with ages between 7 and 12. Back outside, Detective Emery Finch examined the back tires. The treads were whole, not worn. The undercarriage showed no sign of having been driven post-burial. That meant it had been placed, not crashed, entombed deliberately with precision. At 12:40 p.m., Dr. Royce emerged, pulling off her gloves. "We'll need dental records," she said, "but from posture, positioning, and growth plates, we can confirm. These are the North Lake kids." The media tried to swarm. State police formed a barrier. Forensic techs sealed the perimeter. Inside the evidence tent, a crime scene photographer handed over a printed image to Sergeant Wells. She stared at it for several seconds. "Is this the driver's seat?" "Yes." The photo showed something odd. The bus's ignition was still set to on. The fuel gauge read half full, and the shifter, neutral. More troubling was the steering wheel. Its column was bent downward, jammed, not by accident, but with a force that implied intention. A wrench, maybe, or a bar. The driver's seat was empty, but beneath it, tucked between springs and foam, lay something else. A small envelope. Paper aged to sepia. It was stamped with a county seal but unsigned. Inside, a single Polaroid. The image showed the bus interior. Same seats, same windows, same painted-over glass. But in the photo, the children were alive. They stared forward, eyes wide. Some turned to each other. 2 were visibly crying. On the back, a handwritten note. All accounted for, 10:12 a.m. The handwriting was rushed, uneven, the pen pressure heavy. Someone had written this with urgency, or fear. "When was this taken?" Finch asked. Dr. Royce glanced at the Polaroid border. 1979 batch, Kodak confirmation strip, April. Wells didn't blink. So, someone watched them, knew they were trapped, and took a photo anyway. The crime lab's next discovery came at 2:11 p.m. Paint samples scraped from the inside of the windows matched an industrial sealant used by state correctional transports in the 1970s. Jet black, opaque under light. Not standard school bus issue. Whoever applied it knew what it was meant to do, prevent sight. Not from within, but from without. "Why seal them in if you're going to bury the whole thing?" asked the rookie tech. "Because for a few hours, they were still above ground," Wells said. The lab confirmed. Each window had been coated evenly, with sponge pattern residue indicating manual application. No drips, no overspray. Someone had taken time. The public response was swift. Candlelight vigils appeared overnight. Citizens posted class photos of the lost children, names long erased from state custody logs. Former staff from Northlake, now elderly, began coming forward. Most remembered nothing. But one retired cook recalled the driver. "He wore gloves even in summer," she said. "Wouldn't talk to the kids. Said he was just transit." Investigators checked Orville Lester's file. Clean. Until June 1979. Then nothing. No tax return, no death certificate, no surviving relatives. At 5:03 p.m., as the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, state forensic analyst Jamal Knorr entered the command tent. He was holding something. Found this lodged between seats 15 and 16. It was a narrow strip of film. 8 meters. Burnt on one edge, warped by time. Still viewable. They spooled it into the lab scanner. The footage ran for 19 seconds. It showed the children, seated, silent. And then a slow pan, someone walking down the aisle. The person filming wore gloves. A shadow crosses the lens. The bus door shuts. The camera lowers. And the last frame. Darkness. Then silence. Wells exhaled, her voice low. The children weren't just transported. They were filmed. This was staged. Someone had planned this. Down to the seat numbers, down to the lighting, down to the last belt click. Who and why? April 7th, 2007. 2 days after the bus was exhumed, the media flood reached saturation. Every local outlet replayed aerial footage of the yellow shell being lifted from the soil. The phrase, "mass grave on wheels," trended online. But inside the command tent, the mood had shifted from horror to interrogation. Detective Finch studied the bus's interior under UV light. Then he paused. Something shimmered across the paneling above the driver's side. He motioned to the tech. "Bring the scanner. There's residue here." The black light exposed long, uneven streaks above each row of windows. A closer scan revealed they weren't just paint remnants. They were fingerprints, small, numerous. "Children," Finch muttered, reaching. The implication was brutal. The windows had been painted from inside. Dr. Royce was called in again. She examined the smear patterns, tracing arcs and lines. "See this curve?" she said, pointing. "Consistent with lateral swipes, arm-length strokes. Not adult height. Likely under 5 feet. "You're saying the kids painted the windows themselves?" Finch asked. Royce nodded slowly. "Either they were told to, or they thought they had to." That same afternoon, Sergeant Irene Wells headed to the county records hall. She requested the orphanage's audit files from spring 1979, specifically financial reviews tied to transport expenses. It took 3 clerks to pull the boxes. Inside a crumbling green folder marked T Subsidiary Funds, Field Operations, she found a notation. Maintenance transfer received, $4,700, dispersed to on-site logistics. There was no vendor name, no signature, just a red stamp, processed. Wells checked the corresponding date, March 22, 1979, exactly 2 weeks before the children vanished. "Logistics for what?" she asked aloud. The next entry raised more alarms, a canceled check image, made out to H.C. Dalton. Not a vendor, a foreman, a man who had allegedly disappeared. Back at the command tent, Dr. Royce continued cataloging personal effects. At seat 6C, she retrieved a metal hair clip shaped like a daisy. At 11A, a sock with stitched initials, LC. At seat 10D, something stranger, the remains of a walkie-talkie. Crushed, wires exposed. Beneath it, a folded paper. Royce opened it carefully, brushing away layers of rot. It was a child's drawing. Crayon on ruled notebook paper. It showed a yellow bus surrounded by stick figures, 30 dots, all with round faces, a sun in the corner, and one tall figure, square head, dark body. Above it, the word manager. Not driver, Royce noted. At 4:12 p.m., Wells returned and laid the financial files across the evidence table. We were looking at the bus, but the story starts before that. She pointed to the check images. $4,700 laundered through Orphanage logistics to Dalton. Finch frowned. What the hell costs nearly $5,000 in 1979 for a field trip? Nothing, Wells replied, unless you're buying silence. Just then, a radio crackled. Sarge, you need to hear this. It was Deputy Tanya. She'd been digging through VHS tape archives from the county courthouse, converting surveillance logs from the 70s. One showed a lobby angle, May 2nd, 1979. At timestamp 3:17 p.m., a figure entered. Male, slender build, ball cap low. He carried a manila envelope. He approached the clerk desk and handed it over, then left. On the sign-in sheet, the name written was H. Dalton. The envelope had been logged under evidence, never opened. Wells called for retrieval. 20 minutes later, it was in her hands. Inside, 8 photographs. Each one showed children on a bus. But these weren't the forensic crime photos. They were taken through a foggy lens. A window? The images showed the kids as they painted the glass from inside, brushes in hand. No adult visible. But in the final photo, a shadow fell across the aisle. A wide, looming silhouette. Head slightly tilted. Same shape as the crayon figure, Royce whispered. Beneath the photos was a single note, typed. If anything happens to me, this is why. They made me help, but I kept proof. No signature. Wells read it twice, then folded it carefully. Dalton didn't run, she said. He tried to expose them. Later that evening, a retired employee from the county garage came forward, a man named Glenn Mars, now 79. He asked to speak off record. I remember that bus, he said. That month? I logged it for tire service, but it came in overnight. No paperwork, just keys left in my drawer. Who dropped it off? Don't know, but when I got in the next morning, the bus was spotless inside, too clean, and the windows already black. He hesitated, then added, I told the sheriff at the time. He said, forget it. It's already buried, he said. I thought he meant paperwork. Now, I'm not so sure. By 11:45 p.m., Wells sat alone in her cruiser, listening to the old 8mm tape again. The sounds, the footsteps, the whisper. This time, just before the tape cut to black, a voice. Faint. Paint faster. They'll see us. She replayed it. Again. Paint faster. The kids weren't hiding. They were being hidden, on command, by someone they feared, but who still made them call him manager. And someone, somewhere, wanted that command buried forever. Until now. Who gave that order? Wells whispered. And more importantly, who enforced it? April 8th, 2007. The command tent smelled of sweat, black coffee, and ancient rust. Forensics had logged all 30 juvenile skeletons, but now it was time for deeper answers, the kind that came not from remains, but from chemistry. In the mobile toxicology lab stationed just yards from the unearthed bus, Dr. Selma Royce stood over an array of glass tubes. She wore double gloves, a mask, and an expression of controlled alarm. Sample batch 6C, she told her assistant. Femur, marrow intact, submerge, centrifuge. The assistant obeyed. The lab machine hummed. Royce scribbled numbers into her logbook. It took 12 minutes to confirm the result. All 30 samples shared the same compound. Diazomalatrine, Royce muttered. That's not over-the-counter. It wasn't even legal in the U.S. in 1979. A sedative-class tranquilizer used for short-term restraint in certain psychiatric wards and banned the following year for its suppressive effects on respiratory systems. Each child had received a dose. At 8:34 a.m., Detective Finch stepped into the lab, still shaking off the cold from the morning site inspection. Doc, I heard you got something. Royce looked up from her notepad. They were sedated. Every single one of them. Finch exhaled quietly. That's why there's no panic, no scratches, no fractures. They didn't even scream. Royce nodded. Not if they couldn't stay awake. The only logical delivery method would have been ingestion. Royce ran tests on recovered dental caps and enamel. Several traces showed residue on the molars consistent with dissolvable agents. Someone had given them tranquilizers, likely hidden in food. Back in the orphanage archives, Sergeant Irene Wells cross-referenced the orphanage kitchen logs from March and April of 1979. A supplier name appeared repeatedly: Golden Meal Systems, a local contractor, no longer in operation. But Wells found a storage address in a defunct zoning permit. She drove alone. The storage unit was 2 counties over, buried behind a now abandoned distribution warehouse. With a bolt cutter from her cruiser, she cracked open Unit 112. The air stank of metal, dust, and old starch. Inside, pallets of boxed food rations, expired decades ago. Most were swollen from moisture, but in the corner, behind broken shelving, she found an untouched crate. The label was faded. GMS, Child Portion, April 79. Inside, each package contained a vacuum-sealed tray labeled Field Meal Trip Special. Menu: chicken casserole, corn niblets, apple pudding. Wells radioed for a sample crew. This might be how they did it, she said. Back at the lab, Royce ran new tox screens on the preserved food. The result: positive. Diazomalatrin present in all 3 components, most heavily in the pudding. Whoever planned this wanted to be sure, she said. Back at the site, a secondary dig began. With the bus fully removed, the soil beneath revealed fresh anomalies. Near the right rear wheelbase, a crushed object was found, cylindrical, partially melted. Forensic technician Carla Mendez examined it under magnification. This was a torch canister, she reported, industrial weld grade. Finch frowned. Well, say, why bring welding gear to a field trip? The answer came 3 hours later. Buried 4 feet beyond the front bumper, a second object surfaced, a steel toolbox. Old, weather-worn, welded shut, but not perfectly. The hinge had a fault line. Inside, a rusted driver's uniform, county patch intact, gloves, a pair of boots, and a notebook, sealed in wax paper. Finch cracked it open. The pages were faint but legible. Each page bore timestamps, notes, fragmented, some readable. 8:40 a.m. Loaded and seated. Doors sealed. 9:10 a.m. Dose administered. Pudding batch. 10:12 a.m. Quiet. Then the last entry. 11:00 a.m. Instructed to prepare seal. All exits locked. Rear vent reinforced. Welding begins. No signature. But the initials at the top. HCD. Harold Dalton. Finch whispered. The man who vanished after testifying. The man who allegedly delivered a check to the courthouse. The same whose badge had been found under the bus. Wells stepped closer. He was documenting everything, maybe as insurance, maybe because he knew no one else would. She opened the notebook to its final page. A scrap was taped there, lined paper, childlike handwriting. Dear Mr. D, I don't want to go. Please don't make us. It was signed Leah C. Wells turned pale. That name was on the sock we recovered, 11A. Finch looked at the toolbox again. He buried his uniform with the notebook, like he wanted to leave the roll behind. Then they noticed something else. Beneath the toolbox was a single metal key, attached to a red tag, Mech Locker, North Lake. Later that night, they obtained a warrant for the orphanage's basement archives. The building had long been condemned, partially collapsed and dangerous, but the mechanical room was still intact. They found the locker, rusted, numbered 004. Inside, a reel-to-reel tape recorder, labeled April Final. Wells threaded it, pressed play. The tape hissed, then clicked, then a voice, male, measured, trembling. This is Harold C. Dalton, maintenance foreman, Franklin County. If you're hearing this, I'm gone. Or worse. I was told it was just relocation, a cover. No one was supposed to get hurt. A long pause. But I saw them. I saw what they planned. I tried to stop it, but they said it was too late, that the audit was coming, that 30 was a number the state would reabsorb. I didn't understand. Not until I saw the paint, the pudding. The voice cracked. They were just kids, and we fed them to the dirt. The tape ended in silence. Outside, the wind howled against the broken stone of the orphanage, and inside the command tent, no one spoke for several minutes. Because now they knew, the children weren't just drugged, they were erased. Budget lines, names in ledgers. 30 souls buried in silence, and one man tried to warn them, but no one listened. April 9th, 2007. Rain lashed the sides of the Franklin County morgue as Sergeant Irene Wells studied the evidence board. Red string threaded between photos, the unearthed bus, Dalton's badge, the sedative-laced pudding tray, and now, centered, his notebook. A man at the edge of something monstrous. But he wasn't the monster. That morning, pathologist Dr. Selma Royce met her inside the lab. "You need to see this." Laid on the autopsy table was a plastic evidence tray. Within it, a single object found during the secondary excavation pressed deep into the front seat upholstery, a badge-shaped keychain. The nameplate read, C. Dalton. "A child?" Wells asked. Confirmed. Clyde Dalton, age 10. Records show he was admitted to Northlake the year before the disappearance. No known relation to Harold, at least none the orphanage disclosed. But this proves otherwise. She gestured to the X-ray beside them. Seat 2B, bones are juvenile, male, but there's a healed spiral fracture on the left radius, typical of defensive wounds. Could have been older, a guardian. Wells felt the knot in her chest tighten. Harold tried to save them, but one of them was his. Meanwhile, Detective Emery Finch followed the maintenance key they'd found beneath the toolbox. The orphanage's mechanical archives were empty, except one drawer, locked. He forced it open. Inside, a brown manila envelope, sealed in wax. 1979, foreman asset transfer. It contained a single form, a reassignment slip. It authorized the transfer of one county employee, Harold C. Dalton, to off-record oversight duty. Signed not by an orphanage official, but by a state auditor, Raymond H. Greaves. Finch stared at the signature. "We've been looking in the wrong place," he muttered. That name hadn't appeared once in the orphanage records, but it had appeared in the 1979 county financial audits. Greaves had been tasked with suppressing whistleblower reports of funding abuse. Instead, he buried the leads and vanished a year later, after resigning amid a still unexplained health sabbatical. Back at HQ, Wells dug into Greaves' old property records. A rural listing popped up, an old cabin near the border, inactive utilities, last taxed in 1993. They got a warrant. By dusk, Wells and Finch were off-road, tires crunching gravel, headlights cutting through mist. The cabin was a skeletal shape in the woods, half swallowed by ivy. They approached with caution. Inside, the floor was dust-layered, furniture mummified in sheets. But the back room was different. A desk, an old tape recorder, and a filing cabinet that had been nailed shut. Finch pried it open. Files, hundreds, all stamped with county seals. Dozens marked confidential, non-standard termination. One in particular, file Noksha 304C. Subject, Dalton, Harold. Status, asset compromised. Below that, a list of exposure events, code word entries, bus 6, cull, override. "What does cull mean here?" Wells whispered. "It means they cut the number," Finch replied. 30 kids, one bus, no survivors, and the final name on the list? Override, executed by Orville Lester. The driver, now presumed missing. But the files told a different story. Lester had been employed post-1979 by a shell entity, Westbridge Logistics. Their address? A warehouse in Huron County, shuttered since 1988. They drove through the night. The warehouse was locked, but not secure. Inside, pallets, crates, and rows of abandoned transport vehicles, some still labeled with orphanage designations, and one unmarked panel van. Its interior was gutted, padded, and in the glove box, a faded Polaroid. Wells pulled it into the light. It showed Lester, standing beside bus 6, smiling, but behind him, blurred in the background, was a row of children. Not 30, more like 33. And one wore a red windbreaker that didn't match any Northlake records. "These weren't all orphans," Wells murmured. She turned the photo over, written in red ink, excess returns. It didn't make sense, until she remembered what Dalton had said on tape. 30 was a number the state would reabsorb. So, who were the extras? They raced back to HQ. There, Royce had more. I reran isotope tests on bone samples from 3 of the skeletons. Their water traces don't match Franklin County. They grew up elsewhere, farther east. So they weren't from North Lake? Finch asked. Royce nodded. They were planted. 30 was the number that could disappear cleanly. Funded, claimed, then silenced. But someone slipped in others. Kids without records. Kids no one would look for. What kind of system builds that in? Wells asked. Finch didn't answer. He just stared at the photo again. Bus 6, Orville Lester, and the red windbreaker kid. What happened to the driver? Royce answered quietly. We found something else, beneath the bus, in the trench, wedged under the axle. She held up a crushed metal object. Badge, County Transit Authority. The name, Lester, which meant he hadn't vanished. He'd been buried with them, and someone else had driven that bus into the earth. Someone with keys, authority, a reason to hide the driver, a reason to finish the job. So, who replaced him? And who made sure that 30 kids stayed belted in forever? April 10th, 2007. Just past midnight, the autopsy lab phone rang. Dr. Selma Royce, already at her desk, answered before the second ring. Royce, you need to come downstairs now. It was Mendez, the forensic tech, voice low, shaken. When Royce arrived in Sub-Bay 2, Mendez stood by the cold storage unit. One gurney had been pulled out. This was seat 12C. We logged it as a match for Orphan record Kenneth Dwyer, age 10. But something's wrong. He handed Royce a jawbone x-ray. There's a fracture here, recent, pre-mortem. Looks like a sharp force impact. Royce frowned. Accidental trauma? No, consistent with forced dental extraction. That was rare, disturbing. She checked the molar sockets. 3 were empty, carefully removed. Royce's voice went quiet. Someone took the teeth before burial. Mendez nodded. And not just here, we found the same pattern on 2 other skeletons, same side, same sequence. Always the upper molars. Royce didn't say it, but she thought it. Toothprints, identification. Someone had erased them on purpose. At 7 a.m., Sergeant Wells received a call from the Department of Transportation Archives. A box of microfiche logs from 1979 had finally been delivered. She and Finch unspooled the first reel, line after line of transit logs, but one stood out. April 5th, 1979. A service override request logged at 6:49 a.m., 2 hours before the bus departed. Service override, ID #107X. Authority level, classified. Origin code, FCP restricted. Wells stared at the printout. That code's not civilian. They traced the origin point, FCP, Franklin Correctional Program, a juvenile unit decommissioned in 1982. It had been run jointly by the Department of Youth Services and a state contractor. That contractor, Westbridge Logistics. Finch paced. That's who employed Lester after 1979. They requested old intake logs from the correctional unit. It took 2 hours. When they arrived, Royce cross-referenced dental records. 3 names triggered immediate flags. Not North Lake orphans, but state wards, transferred from the FCP program 3 days before the bus trip. They weren't part of the field trip, Royce said. They were added, last minute. Wells read the names. Preston Cole, Denny Rourke, James E. Dalton. She froze. Dalton. Not Harold, not Clyde. Another one. Royce ran the records. No matching remains among the 30, which meant one of 2 things. He wasn't on the bus, or his body was somewhere else. Back in evidence processing, the team was scanning the found objects. Everything from toys to torn shirt buttons. One item, recovered from seat 5D, had gone unnoticed. A half-melted photograph. Thermal imaging revealed the image. 4 children, wearing state-issue correctional jumpsuits. On the back, scrawled in ink, "For James. Try to smile this time." Wells called Royce. We need to know if this James was Harold's son. They checked family records, cross-referenced guardianship. Confirmed. James E. Dalton, born 1967. Sent to Franklin Correctional Program after juvenile truancy. Harold's first son, not Clyde. So he had two sons, Wells whispered. One orphaned, one institutionalized. Both disappeared. Meanwhile, Finch met with a retired Westbridge accountant, Earl Tannings, who had come forward anonymously. He wore thick glasses, spoke slowly. We had contracts with the state, transport mostly, but some special programs too. What kind of special? Finch asked. Child relocation, reduction initiatives. The files used code terms. Excess reconciliation. Finch leaned forward. What did that mean? Tannings hesitated. Overhead, kids who weren't assigned full funding, or ones too expensive to maintain. You're saying they were removed? Tannings nodded once. That's what the phrase meant internally. Cull. Finch felt his pulse spike. Bus 6 was a reconciliation run. Tannings went pale. That wasn't supposed to resurface. Back at the lab, Royce received new data. Soil samples from the burial trench had been sent to microbiology, and they'd found something. Traces of a compound used in long-term body preservation. Unusual in outdoor environments. Formaldehyde, injected post-mortem. Why preserve remains in a sealed bus? She asked aloud. And then the report from the tire tread expert arrived. The grooves beside the bus weren't just from a maintenance truck. They were dual sets. One from the Ridgecraft Model 500, Dalton's truck, and one from a correctional transport van, loaded, heavy. They brought them in 2 batches, Wells whispered. Finch entered, face pale. We got a name match. The man who signed the override. Raymond Greaves. He's alive. They found him in a private elder care home, under a false name. An hour later, they stood in his room. Greaves was old, eyes cloudy. But when Wells showed him the bus photo, he wept. I told them to seal it, said no one would ever find it. Who ordered the override? She asked. Greaves looked up. Not me. Someone higher, from the contractor. I was just the pencil. Wells pulled out the crayon drawing recovered from the bus, the one with the manager figure. Greaves stared, then whispered, That's him. Who? Greaves looked afraid. He was never in the records, but he was always watching. He reached under his mattress, pulled a file. Inside, a single name and a photo. A man in a county supervisor's jacket, the same face seen in the blurred tape, walking the aisle of the bus before it went dark. Wells read the name, then looked at Finch. This wasn't just a state cover-up. It was corporate, federal, and that manager, he's still alive, still uncharged, still watching. April 11th, 2007. Dawn cut low across the orphanage ruins. Morning frost clung to the vines, snaking through collapsed rafters. But inside the cordoned wing of the old residence hall, the interview room had been cleared. 2 chairs, 1 camera, 1 file. Sergeant Irene Wells paced in silence. The matron was late. Her name was Frances Elva Rowan, former senior caretaker at Northlake Orphanage, 87 years old, living in a retirement complex 30 miles away. She had refused interviews for nearly 3 decades, citing memory loss, trauma, or simply, I've said enough. But the unearthed bus changed everything. At 9:22 a.m., the door creaked open. Rowan entered with a walker, her coat draped over frail shoulders, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak until she sat. So, you dug it up, she said. Wells nodded. We need to talk about April 5th, about what really happened. Rowan looked at the camera lens, then back at Wells. Off the record? It's already running, ma'am, and it's not going to stop. Rowan sighed, a long, dry exhale. I was told it would be routine, that the children had a scheduled outing. I signed the release, then returned to my duties. Who told you? Rowan hesitated. Director Pell, and someone from the board. I don't remember his name. He wore a badge, not an orphanage one. Said he was state oversight. Wells pulled out a photo. The manager from the tape footage. Rowan didn't flinch. That's him. Wells leaned forward. Did he interact with the children? Not directly. He spoke to Lester and Dalton. Wells paused. You saw Harold Dalton? Yes, briefly. He wasn't scheduled for that day. I remember asking him why he was there. He just said, they changed the numbers. What did he mean? Rowan's voice lowered. We had 27 children at the orphanage that week, but 30 boarded that bus. The other 3? Rowan shook her head. I didn't know them. They weren't ours. Wells opened her notebook. Why didn't you come forward? Rowan looked up. Her eyes, clouded with age, still sharp. Because I was told to shut up or disappear, and I believed them. Wells slid a photo across the table, a child's drawing, the figure labeled manager. Who told the kids to board? Rowan didn't speak for 10 seconds. He did. That man. I watched from the window. Lester was nervous, kept adjusting his collar. Dalton looked like he'd seen a ghost. Did the children resist? Rowan's voice cracked. Some cried. A few hesitated, but they obeyed, like they always did. Wells tapped her pen against the desk. Did you know what was going to happen? Rowan's whisper was almost inaudible. I knew it wasn't a trip. Silence. Then Wells asked, who fed them that morning? Rowan swallowed. I did. Casserole trays delivered by Westbridge. Pre-labeled field meal. Did you notice anything? The pudding tasted metallic. I remember that. But the kids didn't complain. Some didn't finish it. Others licked the lids clean. Wells scribbled notes. Did anyone check on them after departure? No. The phone lines were down by noon. I was told not to worry. Rowan reached into her purse, pulled out an envelope. I kept this. Don't ask why. Inside was a photograph, a black and white staff picture from March 1979. 10 adults, arms folded. Wells scanned it, then paused. He's not here. No, the man in charge never stood for photos. Wells turned to the back of the image. Names were scribbled faintly, but one line had been violently scratched out. Only 3 letters remained. R-S-H. Finch entered with urgency. We got something. Lab retested Dalton's truck, found a compartment welded under the rear bench. He placed a clear bag on the table. Inside, a tattered notebook, handwritten. Wells opened it. Pages fell open like dry leaves. April 3rd, 1979. They changed the head count again, said 3 new boys would arrive from the system. No files, just faces. April 4. Someone put film in my locker. Photos of the corridor. Kids sedated, not ours. April 5. They told me to seal the door, said it was standard. It wasn't. And then, one line repeated 3 times. The man in the black coat watches. He never speaks, but he points. Wells turned to Rowan. Did he ever give a name? Rowan nodded once. He said, tell them R. Stanton Hyde is on site. That's the name he used. Wells froze. Stanton Hyde? She looked at Finch. Pull every employment record, county, state, federal, cross-match aliases. Find him. Rowan stood shakily, one hand on her walker. He's still out there, isn't he? Wells didn't answer, because she didn't know. All she knew was this. Someone ordered 30 children onto that bus, and someone told the man with no name to make sure they never got off. Now they had a name. But was it real, or just another mask? April 12th, 2007. Rain hammered the windows of the evidence processing room, as if the sky itself wanted inside. Detective Finch stood hunched over the object tray, gloves tight, eyes fixed on a new artifact from seat 18A. It was a wristwatch, a child's model, plastic band, cartoon rabbit face cracked from pressure. The hands were frozen at 10:47 a.m. Time of death? He asked aloud. Dr. Selma Royce shook her head. Could be, but more likely it stopped during burial. Pressure, moisture, or something else. Wells examined the strap. It was cinched tight, still latched. No signs of struggle. Just an eerie stillness. This belonged to Lee Carter, she said. 10 years old. The only orphan who had a surviving sibling in county care. They brought in the brother, now 41, quiet, weathered. He remembered the watch, said Lee had gotten it from a charity event. It never kept time right, the brother said, but he loved it, wore it every day, even to bed. Royce checked the interior again. But this one stopped exactly once. 10:47 a.m. Wells checked the timeline. That's right around when Dalton made his last note. Quiet. At 10:50 a.m., lab tech Carla Mendez walked in, holding another envelope. From the preservation trench, sample 32D, inside, fragments of a synthetic fiber. Royce ran it under microscope, then leaned back. This isn't cloth, it's mesh. Industrial military grade, like something from a reinforced glove or a soft restraint system. Wells frowned. Someone touched them, handled them, while they were unconscious. Or as they woke, Royce said. Some of the remains have bruising patterns along the clavicle, post-sedation. Finch looked over the shoulder of the technician, scanning a final tray of artifacts. There it was, a paper scrap, charred at the edge, fused to the inside wall of the bus behind seat 22C. They peeled it free. Lined paper, faded ink, blocky handwriting. Don't look at him. Just breathe. It's almost over. Royce turned pale. A note from one child to another. But which? Later that afternoon, Wells received a digital copy of a 1979 Northlake yearbook from a school archivist. All children accounted for. 30 listed. But someone had circled 3 faces in black marker. Scanned. Archived. She zoomed in. These 3 weren't confirmed by remains. No dental, no wristbands, no match. Finch leaned over. Maybe they weren't on the bus. Or maybe they were taken off before the burial. Royce tapped the screen. Their faces. Do you see it? All 3 had faint bruising near the collarbones. In their portraits. She pulled up the trauma scans. Same bruising pattern. Same finger spacing. Finch whispered. But that means someone handled them before the photos, before the trip. That evening, at 6:19 p.m., a tip came in. A woman in rural Indiana claimed her uncle had worked transit in the 70s. He'd left behind tapes, one labeled Busboy Session. Wells and Finch flew out the next day. Inside a dusty attic, they found a lockbox, 4 cassette tapes. 1 was blank, 2 were damaged. The 4th, a faint hiss, then audio. Children, whispering, breathing. A voice, calm, measured. Repeat the order, just like before. A child's voice, trembling. We board the bus. We sit still. We don't speak. Good. Again. The man's voice was coaxing, practiced, familiar. Wells recoiled. That's him, the manager. The tape continued. And what if someone asks you where you're going? Child. We say, it's a surprise. The tape clicked off. Finch stared at the recorder. He rehearsed them, not a kidnapping, a program. That night, Wells reviewed the field trip forms again. One line leapt out. Departure cleared by, R.S. Hyde. No title, no department, no trace. At 10:47 p.m., the exact time stamped on Lee Carter's frozen wristwatch, Wells wrote it on the evidence board, 10:47 a.m. Silence. 10:47 a.m. Stillness. 10:47 a.m. Program ends. And one question echoed through her mind. Was that the moment they stopped breathing? Or the moment someone decided they could? April 13th, 2007. Just past dawn, the dig resumed at a flagged site 50 feet from the burial trench, labeled Peripheral Anomaly C. The soil wasn't just loose, it was wrong. Too soft, too stained. At 7:14 a.m., the drill hit fabric, not clothing, synthetic hair. Carla Mendez examined it under scope. No root, not human. Doll hair. Moments later, they found a porcelain cheek, a glass eye, and one melted child's shoe. Then came the plastic arm. A name written in faded Sharpie. Emmy. Wells checked intake logs. No Emmy listed. She wasn't one of the orphans. The soil report returned at 10:12 a.m. It showed burn residue, potassium nitrate, ash, paraffin, barrel fire chemistry, but the grass line around the site remained intact. "Contained burn," Royce muttered. "Not accidental." Then they found it, a metal axle buried beneath a collapsed wheelbase. A child's cart, not a bus, not big enough for people. But something protruded from the casing, a small hand bone. The aerial from 1979 revealed a low structure once stood here, gone by 82. Not in any zoning map. A former maintenance worker recalled night shifts, pouring cement near a containment slab. He remembered crates, one labeled EDU Arch. Wells pulled procurement records. 30 units, child archiving series. Finch read the vendor tag aloud. Westbridge. Later, Royce confirmed the doll hair matched a prototype therapy toy, never sold, designed to resemble real children. Commissioned for memory reinforcement. Wells stared at the arc of burnt ground. They made dolls of the kids. Or the kids were the prototypes, Finch said, and Emmy? She wasn't in the records, because she was never supposed to be. Just one more memory they tried to burn. April 14th, 2007. The sun rose pale and cold over Crescent Hollow. At 6:01 a.m., excavation resumed beneath the bus trench, this time directly below the driver's seat. Engineers had flagged a subsurface void after sonar pinged on unexpected airflow. By 6:44 a.m., a rectangular panel gave way beneath a crushed strut. It was a hatch, not part of the original bus design, welded, reinforced, then hidden. Finch crouched at the edge, flashlight angled. A narrow shaft, 7 feet deep, led to a horizontal tunnel. Concrete walls, reinforced brackets. Professional-grade construction. Someone built a chamber beneath the bus, he said. Wells stepped forward, or the bus was lowered onto it. They descended slowly. The tunnel extended 12 feet before ending at a sealed hatch, metal, with a biometric latch, decades ahead of its time in 1979. But the lock was broken now, pried open from within. Finch pushed the door. Inside, the space opened into a square vault, 10 feet by 10, fluorescent bulbs shattered, a two-way mirror cracked from heat stress, a single plastic chair, and on the far wall, handprints, children's handprints, pressed into dust, some smeared, some overlapping. Wells's voice was barely audible. This was an observation room. Carla Mendez arrived with the blacklight wand. She scanned the mirror. More appeared. Words. Written in fingerprints, "We saw him." Another layer, fainter. "He watched from the dark." And at the center, scratched directly into the glass. "He said don't move." Back topside, Royce examined soil strata samples. The ground beneath the chamber was compacted deliberately, multiple pressure zones suggesting heavy equipment. Finch checked contractor permits from 78 to 79, nothing listed. Because this wasn't county work, he said. Wells contacted a retired utility inspector, Gerald Rooks, who had mapped Crescent Hollow's pre-development phase. He remembered a crew laying experimental conduit for a firm called Aegis Systems. "That name doesn't exist anymore," he said. "Government folded them in 83. He faxed an old blueprint. The chamber matched, codenamed Sub-View Cell. Below it, another unit was listed, Echo Pit. By 1:15 p.m., the drill team hit a second space, 8 feet deeper. Air rushed upward. The stench, chemical, wet rust, something else, filled the trench. When they opened the hatch, they found it. A pit lined in steel, and in the center, a single reclined chair bolted to the floor. Restraints fused into the armrests. The headrest split open, as if someone, or something, had broken free. Royce stepped back. This wasn't a chamber for observation. It was for suppression, Finch said. Beside the chair, a medical tray, rusted. But on it, one preserved object, a mouthguard, children's size, labeled in faded ink, D3, Hyde. Wells stared at it. Hyde wasn't just the manager, he was the subject, or the trigger. At 3:06 p.m., they found the last clue, an embedded speaker unit beneath the chair. They played the degraded tape, static. Then, "When the light goes out, do not scream. Screaming feeds him." Another voice, younger, childlike. But I saw him blink. The tape cut. Back in the command tent, no one moved for a long time. Then Wells said it aloud. The bus wasn't the whole story. It was the delivery system, the chamber, the trigger. But what did it trigger? And who put Hyde's name on that mouthguard? Because someone knew, and someone wanted it buried forever. April 15th, 2007. The trench remained cordoned as floodlights bathed the hatch in an artificial dawn. Beneath the earth, the team prepared to descend further, this time not through soil, but through blueprints long erased from public record. Blueprints showing a second structure, deeper, colder. At 6:42 a.m., the crew cracked the foundation. Steam rose from the opening. Air filtered from below, heavy with copper and dust. Wells led the way, flashlight in hand, Finch behind her. The stairs wound downward for 30 feet before opening into a chamber of curved concrete. Silence echoed off the walls. Then they saw it. A sealed room, circular, 20 feet across. At the center, a basin, empty now, but scorched around the rim. Electrodes trailed into the stone floor, fused and blackened. Royce ran a field test. This setup isn't domestic, it's experimental. She found metal fragments etched with a serial code, HYDX78. Finch searched the filing logs again. That tag had appeared once, on a contractor shipping manifest. Destination, North Lake Orphanage. Sender, Aegis Systems. They weren't just supplying toys, they were testing something. On the far wall of the chamber, Mendez uncovered a panel behind crumbling plaster. Inside, a film reel, 16 mm, labeled in red ink, Session 12, Stim Response. They rushed it to a portable projector. The footage was silent, grainy. First frame, a child, seated, strapped. A strobe light flashed in slow bursts, electrodes attached to his scalp. A man stood in the corner, back turned, long coat, dark. Then the light cut. The child's eyes fluttered. His mouth moved. And then, on frame 1720, his nose began to bleed. By 1792, he'd stopped moving. Finch whispered, "This wasn't sedation." "It was conditioning," Royce said. Wells scanned the background. On the wall behind the child, chalk marks, symbols. One repeated 6 times, a circle with a vertical line. She flipped through Dalton's notebook. There it was again, scribbled near the final page. Circle, line. "What does it mean?" she asked. The chamber lights flickered, and then a bang from above. They rushed back up the stairwell. Outside, the forensics tent had collapsed. A support cable had snapped, struck a tech. Minor injury, but beneath the fallen tarp, one more object had surfaced. A metal tin, boxed, sealed with wax paper. Label, transfer copy, 0406-1979. Inside, pages, dozens, intake records. But not for children, for staff. A list of handlers, monitors, testers, and one form marked SH. Wells scanned the data. Sensory harness recipient. Intake code, RSH. Initials, Stanton Hyde. Height, 6'4". Weight, variable. Disposition, passive until audio threshold exceeded. Finch read the next line. Subject housed beneath orphanage for study. Observe only. Do not engage. They turned the page. Audio exposure event led to collapse of subject 3B. All children removed from cell. Incident logged. Memory reinforcement applied. Royce's hands trembled. Reinforcement? That's what the dolls were for. Wells whispered, they tried to erase the memory by replacing it. But something went wrong, and 30 kids paid the price. Back at HQ, the recorder played Hyde's last known session log. Subject resists containment. Proximity to field agents not recommended. Psychological imprint exceeds safe limits. Reduce cohort size. Override if necessary. The final sentence. Witnesses must be neutralized. April 5th wasn't just a disappearance, it was a cleanup. And now the team stood where it happened. One level above a chamber not on any map, one breath away from something built not for children, but for control. Finch looked at Wells. We're not looking for Hyde anymore. She nodded. We're walking into the place that made him. April 16th, 2007. The chamber beneath Crescent Hollow sat quiet for the first time in days. The excavation team had cleared every level, cataloged every object, sealed every artifact. And yet, one question still gnawed at every investigator, every forensic tech, every mother watching from home. Why 30? The final discovery came not underground, but in an archive box mislabeled Field Report, Road Damage, 1980. It was delivered by accident. Inside, soil logs, photos, and a letter. Typed, addressed to Director Stanton H., dated April 7th, 1979. Final protocol has been enacted. Subject retention confirmed. 30 units neutralized per compliance target. Of these, 27 verified through Northlake. The remaining 3 match off-record admissions from FCP. No further queries anticipated. Wells read it twice, then a third time. 27 confirmed, but we found 30 skeletons. Royce pulled dental records again, compared trauma patterns, and saw it. 3 of the children had dental extraction damage, post-mortem. Their teeth didn't match any child on the orphanage roster. They weren't from Northlake. They were from the Franklin Correctional Program, off-book transfers, marked for intake adjustment, which meant, "We were wrong," Wells whispered. 30 didn't die on that bus. Only 27 were meant to. The other 3, added, not as passengers, but as control variables. Royce opened a final tissue sample. Bone marrow. One test remained unprocessed. It returned an anomaly. One of the skeletons showed irregular genetic markers, tissue structure outside known juvenile baselines. Not deformity, modification, synthetic, engineered. Finch stared at the report. One of the bodies wasn't human. Not exactly, Royce replied. It was something else, manufactured, but passed for a child, a doll, a clone, a test unit. Then came the final blow. A DNA match hit the federal database. Not for a child, but for an adult, male, Caucasian, age range 55 to 65, formerly employed by Aegis Systems, name Stanton Hyde. The match came from a tooth recovered beneath seat 1A. Hyde had been on the bus, but he didn't drive it. He was sealed in, just like them. Wells reviewed the bus interior photos again, focused on the driver's seat. Something was off. The pedals were worn unevenly, heel marks too far apart, not built for a man, not even used much. Then she looked at the back row, seat 30C, the only one without a seatbelt. The bones there were wrong, longer, fused. The wrist cuff was bent outward, as if forced open. Wells whispered, he wasn't the driver. He was the prototype. The children weren't just victims. They were passengers on something that never should have moved. That night, Wells stood before the press. 30 children, she said, buried for 28 years, all 30 accounted for. And yet, not all of them were ours. Epilogue. Crescent Hollow was sealed. The land declared a historical investigation zone. No construction permitted. The Aegis Systems records were seized, never released, the orphanage razed. But in a government vault, in a locked room, one object remained, a red mouthguard, fitted for a child, labeled D3, Hyde. They don't know what D1 or D2 were, but they know this. Whatever happened beneath Crescent Hollow wasn't an accident. It was a project, and someone, somewhere, still has the blueprint